Welcome to the Rehabilitation Studies Speaker Series. The event will begin shortly. Thank you for joining us for this week's presentation. If you'd like to learn more about applying for the Rehabilitation Counseling Education Master's Program or the Rehabilitation and Addiction Counseling Master's Program at St. Cloud State University, please email rce@stcloudstate.edu. Applications are currently being accepted for the fall 2021 term. If you would like to watch the recorded version of this presentation or prior presentations, please visit our YouTube channel by searching for St. Cloud State University Rehabilitation Studies on YouTube. Welcome to the Rehabilitation Studies Speaker Series. The event will begin shortly. Thank you for joining us for this week's presentation. If you'd like to learn more about applying for the Rehabilitation Counseling Education Master's Program or the Rehabilitation and Addiction Counseling Master's Program at St. Cloud State University, please email rce@stcloudstate.edu. Applications are currently being accepted for the fall 2021 term.
Joining us. What an opportunity to share the session with my colleague Alyssa and also with a great guest, Ms. Anastasia Somoza. I would like to invite the panel to introduce themselves, and I would like to start with myself. My name is Sonia Cobos, and I'm from St. Cloud State University, the graduate program for Rehabilitation Addictions Counseling. And I'm wearing a black shirt, and I have a white background with a blue butterfly, and I'm also wearing eyeglasses. Alyssa, good morning.
All right, hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
You know, actually your volume is kind of low.
Low? Okay. Just sorry about that.
I think that's better.
Okay, I just wanted to say welcome to the Rehabilitation Studies Speaker Sessions series at St. Cloud State University. Before I introduce myself, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items. If you need CRC CEUs after you pay the session fee and attend the webinar, you will be sent a short quiz. Once the entire series is complete, we will send you your CEU certificate. All the sessions will be recorded and available for free on our YouTube page, but we will continue to allow people to get CEU credits by watching the recordings and taking the CEU quiz. So for me, I'm Alyssa Buchanan. I'm a student at the Rehabilitation Studies program at SCSU. Right now, my background is a bunch of moons. It's a tapestry. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and I have a light complexion. Before I let you introduce yourself, Anastasia, I'd like to introduce our interpreters. So if you guys could tell us who you are.
Good morning, I'm Tara Trujillo. I have a black sweater with a turtleneck, brown hair, blue background, and I'm one of the interpreters.
Good morning, I'm Adeline Riley. I have long blonde hair, I have a black shirt on and a light colored background, and I'm also one of the other interpreters. We'll be switching off today.
All right, so I think, Anastasia, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anastasia Somoza. I am an international disability rights advocate outside of the work that I currently do part-time for the City of New York. And for those that are curious, my title for the City of New York, I work for the Office of City Council Speaker, New York City Council Speaker Corey Johnson. And I'm in the City Council's Community Engagement Division in that role. And I cover all issues that impact disabled New Yorkers, as well as issues that come before the Civil and Human Rights Committee and issues that come before the Committee on Mental Health, Disabilities, and Addiction for the city in that role. And I am wearing a white sort of long sleeve turtleneck top with a pattern at the top of it, and I have medium length brown hair, and I'm in front of a white background.
Thank you. So now, Anastasia, thank you for being here. And I would like to add a little bit to your introduction. There's a lot of things that we can talk about you, and we will try to cover that during this session. Our guest this morning is Anastasia Somoza. She began her advocacy work in 1993. Is that correct?
Yes.
When at the tender age of 9, she had the opportunity to ask President Bill Clinton why her twin sister, Alba, couldn't go to the same school she was going to. And with this short but straightforward question, she moved a lot of emotions, including President Clinton, and eventually that led to your sister to be accepted in the New York public school system. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, Anastasia, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience in public school? And also, I wasn't very clear if you went to mainstream the school at the beginning, or like if you went to special education also.
Okay, so I'll start with that part of the question, actually. So I started out in my early education years. So around preschool through a few of the early grades. I think definitely like kindergarten, and I'm not exactly sure how old I was when I transitioned to the school that I ended up in with Alba, but yes, the beginning of the story is I started out at a school in Long Island, New York for children just with disabilities at the time. It still exists actually. It's called Henry Viscardi. But my parents decided to take me out of that school because when they approached the school on Long Island to accept my sister, they wouldn't allow her to go through the proper evaluation process at the time. So my mother had said she had a team of people working with her and they wanted to participate in the evaluation process to see if she could get accepted to the school. And so they didn't allow the evaluation process to take place in a way that would have allowed Alba, my twin sister, to show what she was capable of doing. So because that evaluation process was not accommodated appropriately for her disability, the school decided not to accept her. And then when that happened, that's when my mother took me out of the school because she didn't want me going to a school that had not accepted my twin sister. And then that's how I ended up at PS 234, which is where Alba was, but she was not in a mainstream classroom at the time. So she was at PS 234, but she was in their special education program initially. But somehow when I was transferred to PS 234, I ended up immediately being placed in a regular education classroom. So I was initially placed in the regular education classroom, and that's how, my parents started to see that I was able to, keep up with all of the coursework, and that I was experiencing really good socialization and all those things. And that's what motivated them to want the same thing for my sister. So they saw that I was able to do it, and then they started the process of requesting that Alba be switched from the special education program to the mainstream program in the public school.
You said your parents were like a large pushing force to get Alba and you in that school. I was wondering, where did you come into that? Like, what made you want to be that kind of like activist for your sister and try to push for her advocacy and all of that?
Well, I guess the main, like the catalyst opportunity, the big opportunity that allowed me to take a role in helping my parents advocate for her was that moment when I got to meet the newly elected President Clinton at the time. He had only been in office for 1 month. And so my parents had already started the process at PS 234, but they were encountering a lot of roadblocks. So I was around that. All of it was happening in our household, and it was the topic of dinner conversations all the time. And then my mom was actually at a meeting upstate New York in Albany because she had been appointed by the governor in our state at the time to be on a bunch of advisory boards and all of those things to advise families who also had children like us. And she was upstate, and that's how she found out about the meeting happening with the president, and she was asked for one of us to go. And because my twin uses augmentative and alternative communication device to communicate, she was just learning how to use that this was 93, 94. So it was very, very new technology at the time, and she wasn't used to using it. So they asked me to go, and that's how I got to be there. And when my mom and I were having the discussion about what to potentially ask President Clinton, I had suggested, just like every other 9-year-old kid, initially I said, well, what about the environment and what about animals? And the only thing that she said was, well, you might want to think about relating your question. I think most of the other kids are going to relate their question to something that impacts them in their personal life that they want to change, not only for themselves, but for other children and other Americans across the country. So she had said that a little bit before the program, and then she said, you know, whatever you ask, I'll be proud of you. And I just ended up thinking about Alba right before I had to ask the question, I'm sorry. And that's how it happened, because she was, you know, like I said, it was a live issue in our household. So I was constantly surrounded by the phone calls, and as soon as she said, try to relate it to your personal life, that was the most prominent thing going on in our life. So that's how the question came to be.
That's pretty amazing, Anastasia. So your mom was an activist herself.
Yeah, yeah. But she became an advocate for children and families who have people with disabilities in their family because we were born. You know, it happened because of her children. And I often say that advocacy I didn't choose advocacy. Advocacy really chose me, because we were born into a world in which people with disabilities weren't getting equal opportunities. So we and our parents recognized that they wanted that for us, and that we were capable of achieving a great deal, but the rest of society didn't see that. So they saw it in us and decided that they needed to, you know, stand up for our right to have the same experiences as everybody else. And I'm grateful that they, you know, encouraged us to be a part of it, because learning to advocate for myself and my twin sister at that young of an age has really, really shaped the person that I am personally and professionally. So I'm very, very grateful for the early lessons I was taught by my mom's persistence and lack of desire to give up.
For sure. You know, and how your mom said, you know, what you'll ask will connect to other children. I was just wondering, first of all, what effect do you think your question had on, you know, the president, or, you know, those who saw it? And also, how do you think, or are you impressed with, are you happy with how things have improved for kids with disabilities in the education system?
So that's a bit of a loaded question, and I want to preface it by whatever I'll speak about in terms of how it's going today. I do want to just note that it will be more anecdotal and more of what I hear through my mom's continued advocacy with parents who currently have children in the school system. But just so everybody knows, I don't work in a school environment right now, and right now I don't cover education for the city. Sometimes my colleagues will pull me in if it's a disability related issue, but I don't follow it as closely as I used to. But yes, generally speaking, in a big way, things have gotten better, because it's more, the reason I say that is because it's more the norm now. So students with disabilities are usually mainstreamed. In other words, in very rare cases, my understanding, at least here in New York City for sure, and my general understanding is this is the case in most places around the country. But again, I'm not an educational expert, so, but my sense is that it's gotten much, much better in terms of the fact that most educators, most school systems, most city and state governments have realized that the best place for most students with disabilities are, in the least restrictive environment, in an environment that's defined by the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So I do think it's gotten a lot better. I think that the areas in which things still need to improve, not only in the sort of grade school setting, elementary school and high school, but also in higher education, is the ability for everyone who's involved in education, so not only teachers, but everyone who's involved in a child's educational development, I think has to get more comfortable with the idea of properly accommodating students with disabilities, because I think that's where the issue still comes in. Like when I got to college, I was still in a situation where not all of my professors were willing to, accommodate me. They knew that I had an IEP through all of my education before college, and I provided all of that documentation. And some of the, back when I was in college, which was a while ago already, I was still, the truth is, with most of my professors were amazing. But generally speaking, I hear from young people that if there's an issue, the accommodations are still an issue. And that's not only limited to colleges and universities. It's not only limited to the education space, in other words. That has to happen more broadly in workplaces as well. I think the pandemic is one of the things that has shown the world that it's not that difficult to change things and to accommodate things. And I think I speak for a lot of people with disabilities when I say it's great that the world is doing it now, because they realize that they had to do it because everybody required it. But that's the problem, is that it shouldn't have taken something like a global pandemic for companies and universities to realize, people can work from home and we can change things around to accommodate people's, you know, circumstances and disabilities, you know.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
that should be happening much more broadly in
Anastasia,
all spaces.
it is really impressive how the work of your mom got all the way to this point where you are right now in your life, and your sister. Both of you are very successful, and it is it is incredible that I was just a small, relatively small accommodation by the school system. You know, like it really just took um, to allow you guys to be on mainstream education and develop your talents there. That is very impressive. That is certainly a testimony.
Yeah, and because I just want to interject things you mentioned, I'll say specifically so that people know. We, like you said, we didn't have that many accommodations. So when we were in elementary school, Alba already had her communication device. So as long as she had that, I was in the classroom with a general education teacher, and then I had what they called at the time, so uh, a consultant teacher. So there was a woman that like helped me with some, so I struggled growing up when I was young with math and sciences. So the consultant teacher would come into the mainstream classroom for my math lessons, and she wouldn't pull me out of the classroom. I would stay in the math class that everybody else was having, but she would sit next to me, and if the teacher explained something that I didn't understand, she knew that later on in the day, she and I would sit together and she would go over the lesson again at different parts of the day where I wasn't in class. So she sat in on some of my classes some of the subjects that I struggled with, but I wasn't pulled out. And that was another big, very specific change, is that when we were much, much younger, when students with disabilities required therapies or extra assistance, the children would be like, we would be removed from the classroom, so we would miss the lessons. But they no longer do that, which is good. Even if the student needs extra support, my understanding today even is that a lot of effort is done to make sure that the students with disabilities are not missing the mainstream lessons, even if they do need the extra support. So
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and it definitely seems like, those changes, and with COVID, it definitely seems like it's moving in a good direction, I hope. Looking into, your advocacy and activism, when we were researching, I just saw some really impressive credentials and awards that you've received for your activism, like how in 2016 you received the Susan B. Anthony Award, and in 2017 you received the Martha H. Ziegler Foundation Award from the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Can you tell us, when did you decide to be an activist or an advocate for people with disabilities? Yeah.
I guess I further developed that as I got older. I just realized that that if people wanted to, if people aren't happy with their situation, I just realized from my upbringing that individual people could actually change that. And that was, like I've been saying, that sense that I had, what came from, my parents. So I just, having met the president at such a young age, I started learning about the importance of civic engagement and local government, like another thing that I did when I was little that is not typical for most children or teenagers is that my mom ran for like local elections here in the city. And so I grew up like, for example, the school board in District 2 here, school boards don't exist here in New York anymore. But when we were in elementary school, she got elected to the local school board. So I was working on very, like not working, but as a kid, as a teenager, I was, volunteering on my mom's early campaigns. And that was like those sorts of experiences sparked my interest in like civic engagement. And when I say civic engagement, for those that might not know what that means, or civic engagement is just a way of, it really is a fancy way of saying, describing how people get involved in their communities. Like it can be, as small as participating in, if you have a local school and you decide to go and, help them run a bake sale, that's civic engagement. So civic engagement can be anything that you do in your local community to give back, not only for your benefit, but the benefit of the rest of the community. So that is, those experiences are kind of what developed it. So by the time I got to college, I knew that I wanted to, that's how I decided to study political science, because I was interested in understanding more deeply and more broadly how government functions to help people. And that's how I chose to, that's how I decided my major. And so that's how I was able to continue those interests, because I was taught at a very young age. I volunteered. Another local campaign that I've volunteered on when I was young was for the public advocate here in New York City. So I just started volunteering on campaigns very young, and it got me interested in politics and government, and that really shaped the work that I do today.
I was listening to you and I was thinking your family has a very amazing dynamic. I mean, it's everything that your mom did during your childhood, and then the fact that you were open to experience that she was exposing you to, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I would like to touch base on something or extend a little bit more on something you mentioned a few minutes before, and is how this COVID pandemic has changed our mindset or the way people without disabilities sees the American with Disabilities Act.
That's a great question, because I think, like I said, it is in some ways extremely disheartening that it took a global pandemic to open up to open everybody's eyes and to get people to see what they always should have been seeing. But it's exactly what I said before, that I think you're absolutely right. What your question implies is that it really did cause everyone else to see that it is possible to accommodate. If you had asked any of us a little bit over a year ago, would it be possible for all of these companies, all of these community-based organizations, all of these, like in every facet of life, will it be possible for everybody to go virtual? None of us would have said, yeah, that's possible. And that is the point, is that you if you are an individual with any kind of disability that needs an accommodation to better function in your daily life, whether it is to work or to go to school or to just be a more happy, productive member of your community, then you need to identify what accommodations would assist you to do that, and find out what the process is to get to put them in place, and fight until it happens, because even though it is possible, and it's in many cases, in many places, even written into legal documents now, everything from, you know, an IEP, an individual with an individual education plan, which is what an IEP is. So that's the legal document. That's one of the legal documents in schools, to everything from an IEP to the IDEA or the ADA. Are all of those things are laws, but not everybody, not every organization, not every institution is really going to implement it the way that they're meant to implement it, unfortunately, unless they're forced to. So, yeah, so I think I guess the direct answer to the question is to just reaffirm that it's absolutely correct. It was the pandemic that showed, you know, everybody that making accommodations in the workplace and in educational institutions, it's not that hard, and the world benefits from it, because then the world gets to take advantage of more talent. What I think society realized, or is starting to realize more broadly, is that to leave Americans with disabilities out is to, you know, lose talent and skill and creativity, and you lose a lot by not including us in you know, in every facet of life. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious in a lot of big mainstream ways, and in the arts, in film, in music, and theater, everywhere. So it's really, really great to see people with disabilities being more public and more mainstream in a bunch of different ways.
Anastasia,
Definitely. Oh,
oh, sorry.
sorry.
I just wanted to add a comment. I think it took kind of like a shift of roles, you know, because usually they see this as a special accommodations. Industry sees, or company sees, as special accommodations, like they're getting out of their way to accommodate someone. But in this case, it was so overwhelming that everybody was at home that they have no option. If they wanted to be productive during 2020, they were the ones that needed the accommodations.
Absolutely.
And suddenly there was a mind shift.
Absolutely. And the reason why that happened is because honestly, part of it is because companies realized their bottom line was going to be affected. The reality is, like you said, all of these companies, the world realized we had to figure out a way to function, because otherwise businesses, educational institutions, you know, we're gonna, you know, crumble. So when the economic bottom line is affected to that degree, you know, that's when they said, okay, we got to figure it out. Which,
You know,
I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm
even
glad
for
that it
small
happened,
companies.
but it shouldn't have taken.
Absolutely.
Shouldn't have taken such a dramatic event for people with disabilities to feel more included and more heard.
Yeah.
In
I
this
was going to ask, how has COVID affected your advocacy career or your political career, like for you personally?
Well, I will say, especially in terms of the work that I do for the city, like I mentioned earlier, my title for the city is I'm a community liaison and I work in the community engagement division. So just from those words, like my role pre-pandemic was I was interfacing with the public a lot. I was the person that tried to connect, people with disabilities and other New Yorkers to what we and what the elected officials here in the city are doing in local government. So I would work with the community-based organizations that represent represent and work with people with disabilities to in all ways. So we cover like every issue you can imagine. So like everything from housing to employment to education to like any local or civic issue that any New Yorker, including people with disabilities, are facing. We we deal with it. So the way that I will say that our community, I think, has had a lot of trouble throughout the pandemic because many New Yorkers, and I'm certain this is the case in other places as well. I think a lot of students with disabilities were still left behind when schools first transitioned virtually. So a lot of the support services are harder to do virtually. Things like, just as concrete examples, like occupational therapy, physical therapy. So in some cases, speech therapy. Like if I've heard a lot of folks who work a lot with those who are autistic. I've heard, are having trouble with the virtual space, and the community-based organizations that have, that support people with disabilities in their to be more independent in the community. So both in their home life and in their work life and in their education, the community-based organizations are struggling to fully effectuate their roles in in the virtual space completely. So some of them have been more successful than others. So yeah, for the disability community here locally in the city, it's been hard. So that means on a day-to-day basis, like I don't get as many requests for events that these organizations are putting on because they've had their funding affected. So they're basically putting out fires. They're basically doing what they can to survive as organizations so that they don't close, so that they are still able to do what they can to work with the people with disabilities that they collaborate with in the community. They're trying to stay open, so the city is helping them with funding and things like that. So that's how my role is shifted, because now I'm working with the organizations to make sure they can maintain their mission. And so it's more about helping them keep their doors open so that the services don't go away. Don't stop. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, of course. So I was watching an interview you had with Lieutenant Governor Katie Hochul, and I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. And this was in July 26, 2020. And you mentioned during that interview, and I'm just paraphrasing, that one of your concerns was that minorities were not receiving some of the benefits that had made a difference in your life. And I would like to understand exactly what you meant by that.
Well, I think I think it's harder for if you are a person of color who also has a disability. What I meant is if you are an individual who comes from a traditionally marginalized community in more than one way. So if you are LGBTQAI and disabled, and if you are also a person of color, you have a much harder time like accessing, you know, the type of life that I've been able to take advantage of. I think it's getting better, but I think even the disability community, all of these movements that are like popping up to change things and make things better, I think even as a community, in other words, what I meant when I spoke about that, I think we still have to do a better job at realizing that in our advocacy, we have to be a little bit more culturally competent and do a little bit more work to reach out to those people with disabilities that we might not be reaching for many reasons, whether it's language barriers, whether it's lack of access to technology and internet. It was just a way to talk about to say that there are people still being left behind, even though, you know, movements like the women's movement and the disability rights movement and some of the more recent ones like Black Lives Matter, all of those movements towards justice have definitely brought a lot more people under the umbrella, but there are still people like indigenous communities that are being left out, even Americans that live in more rural areas of this country have children, whether you have a disability or not, children and families. If you live in rural areas, you're more likely to be left out because of lack of access to technology and resources and internet. So that's what that discussion was about, just about how all of us in all of these movements and areas in which we're trying to make the world more just and equal and diverse, we all need to think about who are we still not reaching and do a better job to reach those people.
So that definitely is a very important point, and I'm glad you brought that up. What are you most focused on right now in your activism? What are your goals? I'm wondering, is that a big one part of your goals?
Well, are you saying like personally or more broad?
Politically, I'm just wondering like what you're focused on, you know, in 2021, like what's something that's on your mind that you're, you know, trying to spread awareness about or anything like that. I'm just wondering what you're up to politically or with your activism.
So the issues that are really important to me today to continue pushing forward on and working on broadly are, you know, our healthcare, because first I have with my level of cerebral palsy, I need somebody to help me get out of bed in the morning, get dressed, to go to the ladies' room throughout the day. So that is called they're called activities of daily living. So I need assistance with all of my activities of daily living. So I am able to take advantage, because of New York City and state government, I'm able to take advantage of what's called home and community-based services. So like I have assistance that allows me to live, you know, in the middle of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan in an accessible apartment and go to work every day and do what I do. So I'm fighting to make sure that home and community-based services, that so more broadly, that people with disabilities can maintain the help that they need, especially those that need the level of help that I do. So those with more significant uh, developmental and other types of disabilities, those that can't function independently in their communities without help, that is really important to me. And the reason why that ties to healthcare is because that's how most of those services get covered. Like those services get covered through the healthcare that I have, but it's a very complex issue because it also affects the way that I'm able to be employed or not fully employed. Like right now, the way that I'm able to have those services also like means that I'm not able to work fully, because if I work too much, some of those services get cut. So that's why it's so complicated, because it's not just healthcare, it's also getting the local elected and federal officials to realize that, you know, we basically, the simplest way I can explain it is to say that I don't want people with disabilities to continue to have to choose between healthcare and being able to work full time. Like and that's a big issue, not for all people with disabilities, because for those who have less significant disabilities, they might not need that much assistance. So that's why it's such a difficult issue, because it doesn't affect everyone who's disabled. It impacts those of us who are significantly disabled enough to need that level of assistance. So it doesn't apply to everyone, and it's from the city and state governments see it as very expensive. So advocates, what we're trying to teach people is that it's more economically efficient to keep somebody like me in the community, because if I didn't have these home and community-based services, the places that I would end up, because of the level of help that I need, I would end up in a nursing home. And so that is what I'm trying to scream from the top of every rooftop that I can all the time, is just to make sure that people like me should not, be worried about ending up in group homes or nursing homes or hospitals, because those are the only places that would provide them with the level of physical assistance in most cases that they need. So it's a very complex issue, because it's not only about healthcare, it's about making sure that people with disabilities can work, and things like the sub-minimum wage, believe it or not, the sub-minimum wage is something that people with disabilities are still fighting where companies try to get, take advantage of loopholes that allow them to pay people with disabilities a lot less than anyone else in the company. So on a broad policy level, those are the things that we're still, fighting, and those are the issues that are most important to me right now. And personally, I'm focused on, I'm also working on a memoir that I'm very excited to try to finish. But broadly, it's healthcare and the workforce. Personally, I'm excited to be doing more writing and creative things. So,
Thank you, Anastasia, for that premise. I'm looking forward to read that book for sure. And we are approaching the last segment of our session. And I would like to attach to this that you just said about healthcare and all the other needs. And I mean, the disabled community, it's a big community. I was looking into some numbers, and this may be all numbers, but it's about 60 million adults,
yeah,
according to the Center for Disease Control Prevention.
yeah, that's a pretty accurate number still.
And then in addition to the person disabled, it's the whole group or network around them that are familiar with their needs. And all of this situation, I mean, this is a sizable voting block. Any politician should be interested in this constituency.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, the narrative is seldom focused on the needs for people with disabilities. And there have been some politicians that have a right approach. I think Obama and Hillary Clinton for sure. They included a group with disabilities as part of their campaign. But it seems like there's no harnessing of the voting power of this community. And I would like to hear what you think and what should be done from you.
Well, in terms of what I think, I would just like I said, your question implies the answer that I would give, which is that I absolutely agree that Americans with disabilities and our surrounding communities and networks and everybody that's impacted by us or comes across us or you're absolutely right. And I'm glad that you mentioned that it's not just the person with a disability, it's our colleagues, it's our families, it's our communities that are impacted, and that's the way that it should be. So I'm glad that you acknowledge that it goes far beyond the actual person who is disabled, because that's absolutely correct. And so I think you're right. We need to pay attention more to that in terms of what can be done. I think that's an area in which still needs a lot of work. I was able to become more involved in that piece of our need to continue advocating when I worked on the secretary's presidential campaign. Well, I didn't actually work on her campaign because I was a surrogate. So I was more like a representative of her campaign who went around and spoke about why I thought, at the time that she would be the best president. And it was through that role and because I spoke at the DNC that I got connected to the DNC, the folks that are, so because of that, I've been able to, even when a presidential campaign is not happening, the DNC still exists. They're always working on things. So I'm still connected nationally. I'm still connected, to the DNC, and I'm doing it with the DNC because it's the political party that I identify with. But I do think that it's something that the the Republican Party needs to be thinking about as well. I'm just not the person who does that because I'm working, as I said, with the political party that I identify with. But both of them need to do a better job of doing exactly what you said, recognizing us as a voting bloc. So what I've done as an individual with that connection and with that access is to try to bring this up in meetings that I attend, and to try to strategize about how we can we can reach out to young people with disabilities in their community to get more involved in leadership roles that start in their communities, but that could lead to them, working on national campaigns and being more involved in their parties more broadly. And there are plenty of other ways to actually do that. One of the ways that I also do that, in addition to still being connected to the DNC, is I'm a commissioner here in New York on this Civic Engagement Commission, and so in my role as a commissioner, we work to get more of the New York community involved and engaged, and that includes working to involve and engage people with disabilities. That's why I was asked by the elected official that I work for to take the post, because he recognized he wanted people with disabilities to be represented on the commission, and the mayor also appointed. I'm not the only person with a disability on the commission, so we're represented on the commission, and at a local level, that's another one of the ways we're tackling that. We're trying to make it so that people with disabilities can become more involved in the political process. The last thing I will say is that it comes down to also accessibility. So in that space, we have to make sure that physical accessibility, that people with all the wide range of disabilities can access, all of the buildings that they need access to make sure that they can vote. So not only on voting days, but when they go register. And we need to have all of the ways in which every American can vote. People with disabilities have to be able to vote in all of those ways. So every form of voting needs to also be accessible. And I think if we continue to work, those are not the only ways in which we make it more possible for Americans with disabilities to be more involved in voting. And the last big way would be to encourage more people with disabilities to run for office, because that's the other big way that it will continue to change, push further in the right direction.
For sure. You said a lot of great points, and it's really interesting to hear about, your political advocacy with New York and office and all of that. And I'm really thankful that you're able to come on here today, and it's just really inspiring to be able to talk to you and learn about, your activism, your political career, all of that. And I just wanted to say, as we wrap up, next week we will have Judy Human on here, and also this weekend is the Oscars too, so to try to watch that for the CRIP camp that's being nominated.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Anastasia. We ran out of time, unfortunately. There's so many more questions on regard to more people with disabilities running for public office. I would like to ask if you have any plans on that regard. And I'm already abusing the extra time, but just quickly.
Yeah, I don't have any specific plans right now, but it's something that I think about often, and it's definitely something that is very, very possible for my. It's not something I'm pursuing right now, but absolutely I do often think about it. So
Excellent. Well, you got my vote. Thank you everyone for joining. I think we're wrapping up.
Thank you, Anastasia. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Thank you for watching the Rehabilitation Studies Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us for this week's presentation. If you'd like to learn more about applying for the Rehabilitation Counseling Education Master's Program or the Rehabilitation and Addiction Counseling Master's Program at St. Cloud State University, please email rce@stcloudstate.edu. Applications are currently being accepted for the fall 2021 term.